All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Faye Walter. I'm the Academic Technology Services Director for Dedman College. And this session is on considering your online students. Now it is labeled as geared toward SMUFlex, but I believe that many of the things we'll talk about considering your online students can be translated into virtual courses as well. So we have a couple panelists with us, and I will let them introduce themselves. If you don't mind just sharing what you teach and your experience with teaching online students. Dr. Hunt, if you want to start.
I'll start. Yeah, so Robert Hunt. I'm in Perkins School of Theology, and I also teach in the MLS and Doctor of Liberal Studies programs. And I've been engaged with the online teaching in some respect or another since before I came to SMU. But the key things here are, of course, we all went through going online quickly in March. But prior to this, we were teaching hybrid courses. So they were courses that were taught in person intensely at the beginning and end, and then 13 weeks of online courses. And this semester, I'll be teaching 2 of the new SMUFlex courses and 1 fully online course. So I've been giving it a lot of thought. Also, the constituency in the graduate school means that I've typically had 1 or 2 students a semester who I was asked to take even though they could not attend every in-class meeting. So I've almost every semester been set up to have 1 or 2 students zooming in to the meetings, to the classes.
All right.
Hi everyone, I'm Jill Kelly, Associate Professor of History, and I taught some fully online courses before I came to SMU, and am bringing my experience of the spring online teaching today as well.
All right, so as we move along, any attendees that have questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. We will be checking that, making sure that we get to it. So first, I just want to ask regarding communication in the classroom. So as we move into the SMUFlex modality, you will have students in front of you and students zoomed in online. So regarding communication, do you have a plan for how you are going to have everyone talking to one another?
That's a good question. I do have a plan. We'll see how well it executes in the new environment. I'm fortunate that my 2 classes are not so very large. So the largest is 20 students. It's going to be a little tougher for people who have really huge classes. But I'm already dividing. We've talked about flipped classrooms. I'm already using a lot of back and forth here, where my plan is to break students into breakout rooms. And with the SMUFlex, my students have been asked that are in the classroom to bring their laptops and Zoom into the meeting, so we can combine students in the classroom with students outside the classroom in discussion groups. They did this summer in Cox, is what I heard, and the main thing was everybody needs to have headphones or earbuds so you don't get a cacophony in the classroom. But that's one of the main things that I'm planning to do in the classroom. I'll just offer one other thing. This will be experimental. I've taught a good deal of sort of Zoom classes, and it really is important to try to get everybody up on the screen, even if they're small, and recognize as many of them as you can. So in some sense, it's like the very old TV shows where, greetings to our studio audience and all of you out there in TV land. But now you can see their names. And so by sort of going back and forth and calling on them, if people don't know this, you can go into Zoom under the settings and say, I want to display, if you've got a powerful enough computer, more people on the screen. Now, I'm going to mention one other thing, total experiment, but I'm going to do it, which is I'm bringing my personal laptop to the room. I'm going to set it up and zoom in on it as a separate participant, so that whatever I do on mine with a PowerPoint, I can still see what every student is seeing zoomed in.
Yes, that is a great idea. You'll just have to remember, do not connect to audio.
Do not connect to audio, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's, but I think that will let me keep track of the Zoom students better. And also I'll know what everybody's seeing.
Yes.
Okay. And that's my first shot at what to do.
I have a similar plan for taking the additional screen in. One of my classrooms already has it and the other does not. And so I want to at least project, like Robert said, the names of the remote students on the screen in the participant list. Also that way that everyone in the classroom can help me if anyone raises their hand. I'm also going to encourage them, to put up professional photos that if they're not sharing their screenshot, that we can still see their face instead of, right now I see an attendee list of BM, CM, HL, so that there are images that we can associate with them. But I also want that second screen so that if they are sharing their videos, I can see their faces and see if they're sticking with us. And I intend to, as Robert said, engage them directly, right? By asking questions not only of the students in the classroom, but those who are with us online. They can volunteer, or I will specifically say, does someone remote want to ask a question, or does someone remote want to comment on that, so that they can bring their experience in. And I also, I'm keeping in mind, one of my classrooms doesn't have the overhead microphones. And so I'm conscious of the fact that I'm going to have to be repeating everything my students in the classroom say and their answers to my questions, so that our remote students are fully engaged with what their classmates are saying. And this is where Robert's idea about everyone bringing their computers into the classroom would help. But I'm also hesitant students to bring more things into the classroom in the middle of a pandemic, and sensitive to the fact that not everyone has a laptop that they want to bring. Yeah, so I'm hoping that those kinds of things will help keep us engaged. But I also intend to make it a requirement that all of my in-class students have to engage in the discussion board weekly, because that'll be a way for some of the students who need to be asynchronous because of time zones, or who can't for some reason be in class that day, even remotely, so that everyone is kind of engaging with one another via that forum. And I talked about this a little earlier in the week in another session about engaging our students. I'm doing a kind of pre-class survey where I want them to tell me about themselves. On the one hand, tell me what they want me to know about their remote status, right? So that if they are working or caregiving, I know to keep an eye on that, that they might not be as present as we like. But also then, so when I do call on them, I can introduce them to their colleagues a little bit better, right? Or their classmates a little bit better. Rather than just say, oh, Joe remote has a question. I can say, Joe, oh, he's a major in X. He wants to contribute to this, right? And so that they can get to know each other in ways that they would if they were sitting in the classroom next to each other, but they can't at this moment.
Yeah.
So many wonderful ideas in there, but one that I want to point out. So Jill mentioned that she's in a room where she has no access to the ceiling microphones, so she will have to repeat what the students in the classroom say. So hopefully if you're teaching SMUFlex, you've been to your room, or you at least know what's in it. But if it does have the lav mic, the lapel mic, you will be in this situation where your students in the room will not be heard by your students that are remote. So it will take some practice, but you'll have to get in the habit of either repeating exactly what they asked, or using your answer to at least explain what in the world you're talking about. Otherwise, they'll have no idea.
And another opportunity I think there is, if you have a student who does bring their laptop, that they could volunteer to be the person who helps us identify remote people volunteering questions or answers, but also retypes the question of the other student in the classroom so that it's being conveyed. I will still repeat it, but kind of sending it out via chat will allow students who are remote to hear and read it as well.
Yes, great. So you can definitely have a student helper that is on Zoom and answering questions or relaying conversations via chat. I would recommend not having it be the same student all semester, because then that kind of becomes their job and they're not in class. You can pick a student each day and make sure they don't connect to audio. So I'm going to get to some of the Q&A questions before we move on. One says, I've been told not to have students in the classroom connect on Zoom with audio. How do the headphones help if they are talking, or do they just chat to each other? So one thing I will say with this, and then if either of you want to speak on that, this would be if you are doing breakout rooms where they're separated, and you would mute the room audio so that it's not cycling through. In just a general class setting, that wouldn't work. It wouldn't be beneficial to you.
Right.
Do either of you want to speak on that?
Yeah, my the only use is in breakout rooms from my perspective, and at that point you mute everybody's audio and the room audio. I have to say, I typically am not going to be in rooms this semester where I'm using a microphone, so I have a little more control over that. We'll see. One of my rooms uses the OWL conference camera, so it's just going to be an experiment. We're just going to have to see how that goes.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's going to be mute all and use it only in breakout settings so that the room audio doesn't feed back to the individuals.
Yes, yes. And another question said, I didn't understand what Dr. Hunt will do with his laptop. How will that show more to him? So just a quick answer, you know, when you share your screen on Zoom, you only have that small sidebar of your remote students that you can see.
Right.
If you have a secondary device that you're joined on, then you get the participant view, which can have the larger view of the videos. Is that what you're planning?
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. And one thing to note there is when you share screen, the participants, it comes up in full screen for them, but they do have the option of then making that screen smaller so that they can see more of their fellow participants. So that'll be a managerial issue as we go along, and you just have to plan for it. You just have to be ready to go, okay, we're moving into this mode. I know I'm going to click these two things and I'll be able to get that view over here. I have to say, in Perkins, not every classroom is set up. Not everybody has a second laptop. Okay, that's one thing. Not every classroom in our place is set up with a computer where your personal laptop could be the second laptop. So this is not always going to be an option for everybody.
That is true, yes.
So I wanted to add, and James Pan gave me this hint when he was training me in my classroom on Monday, is an important thing to think about is most of our PowerPoint slides on newer computers are set to be the full screen, but we have the option to make it that 4:3 so that by having the student Zoom images or participant list on the right, you're not obscuring the text on your slides, which was a problem I had when I was teaching online in the spring. And so that was a really kind of easy way for us to make everything more aesthetically pleasing and for us to not obscure anything by keeping the students on the board or on the projector and visible to our in-class students.
Yeah, I think especially critical if you're recording the whole class session because you're going to have students who watch it later. They're not going to get much out of the PowerPoint if part of it's plastered with student faces.
That is a great point. So continuing on with the communication aspect, Zoom has the chat feature. Do either of you plan to use that in the SMUFlex classroom? And if so, how will you manage that while you're focusing on teaching?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm planning to use it primarily to ask students to answer questions in chat. One thing that does is it means the student who wouldn't raise their hand can actually jump in on chat, and then I'll just look over it occasionally and see what's popping up there. Because they have the choice of either sharing it only with me or they can chat with the whole class, right? And of course, I'll be using the breakout rooms as well. I have to say, it's going to be interesting to see. I've been on so many Zoom meetings in the last 4 months where people use the chat room to hold separate conversations, and it can be very distracting. So I think this is going to be an experiment to see whether the students themselves can pay attention or they're going to get off to chatting with each other. Yeah.
Well, I did set my Zoom up so that the students cannot have private conversations with one another.
Awesome idea.
Send private messages to me. But the other thing that's helpful about the chat function is I do have it set up to automatically save. So if in the moment I miss a comment that comes up or a student can alert to me to what they see, that when you get that file after the fact, I can go back in and give credit to the students who I missed, or if they had questions or comments, I can follow up via email. So it's a kind of extra tool to help me not let anyone slide through the cracks.
Right. One thing that was mentioned in an earlier, and this relates to the same thing, I guess, was mentioned in an earlier webinar that I was on 2 hours ago, is that you can set up Zoom where students have to register to get in to the meeting. Then you have a record of who was in your classroom, both remotely and there. And that also means that you can pick up some of these students that are, now they have to register with an SMU email, by the way, but it does mean that you can go back and look and see if you missed anything or missed anybody that you didn't realize was there.
I will say you can actually do that without registration as well.
Oh, okay.
So 30 minutes after your meeting ends, you can go to your reports on Zoom, and you would think that you'd click meeting, but you don't. You click usage, and then that gives you a list of all of your participants, what time they entered and what time they exited.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Okay, so Jill, you already mentioned that you're going to use the raise hand feature. So you'll have your participant list always visible so that you can see that little hand go up. Dr. Hunt, are you going to use that as well? Or do you just want students to interrupt you when they have a question?
I'm going to see how it goes. I've got a big class and a little class. I think the big class, we're going to use the raise hand feature, especially because I'm worried that the students that are in the class, which is roughly half of them, are going to walk over the Zoom participants. So by creating the same rules for everybody, you're going to raise your hand one way or the other. Then I think that'll get the Zoom participants in more. The smaller class, I'm not too worried if, 4 and 4, I can keep an eye on. I've found that, by the way, in the last 3 months, that my students are keener to use the raise hand feature than I was to deploy it. So.
I've been on Zoom meetings, and I've even been guilty myself where I literally raise my hand, even though I can click the raise hand feature.
Raise hand feature, yeah.
I forgot where my thought was headed. Oh, so Jill mentioned this earlier, calling on, okay, now a virtual student, and then now someone in the classroom.
Right.
Do you plan to do that as well? Kind of mix it up, make sure that the virtual students are engaging equally?
That's my plan. And I think the classes are small enough that I should be able to do this fairly well. I'm hoping that using the chat to answer questions will also draw some of them in a way. It will be, for many of my students, this is an experiment as well. Everybody's been on Zoom a lot the last 3 months, but I'm finding that my more mature students, and that means people my age, are still learning how to stay engaged in Zoom. And so that takes some work, pulling them out. In a sense, it's not different than a regular classroom. It's just that your attention now has to be on something other than the people right in front of your face.
Yes.
And I think the other thing that we can do is, I mentioned the discussion boards that I'm going to set up. I don't want that to be like a parallel conversation. If I keep up with the discussion boards, when I open class, I can say, last week, several students on the discussion board were talking about X. Let's go over this real quick, right?
Yeah.
So that those insights are actually being brought into the classroom and not just kind of siloed in the discussion board online.
Yeah. If I can mention one other thing with this, I'm starting all my classes by asking the students. Now this, by the way, it's not going to work with 150 people, or it's going to be hard. But I'm asking all the students before the first week of class to post in the first discussion board a video of themselves greeting the class and saying something about themselves. So that to the class, everybody's going to be a human person, not a name. And I think if this, I've asked them to keep this short, 60 to 90 seconds. And I'm doing the same kind of thing myself. So I've put stuff up about me, and I hope that way that we've humanized everybody in the class in a different way, and that will start us off on the right track. And then I like the fact that the Canvas discussion boards allow putting videos and things in so that your responses don't have to be just typing something.
Yeah, I think that's a great move, because especially your in-person students are going to see your virtual students on the screen.
Right.
But in most classrooms, except those with the OWL camera, which you are in one, in
Yeah.
most classrooms, the virtual students won't see the students that are in the class. So that is a great way for everyone to meet each other.
Exactly. And I have to say, I haven't yet used the OWL. I bought a Candao camera for another project I'm on, which is also a 360 video conferencing camera, and played with it this summer in one of the classrooms. And I think there's huge potential for it, but I have to say, it adds a layer of complexity to classroom management. But boy, it does give a great view to everybody. It's used in conjunction with Zoom. It means that everybody can see everybody.
Yeah.
But not in a huge room.
Yes.
It doesn't solve all problems. It's going to be too far from the instructor to show the whiteboard, for example. So.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about communication. So now let's get into sharing content. So obviously, when you share your screen in Zoom, your students will see it and the students in the room will see it. And then it gets a little tricky when you have to write on the board, depending on what room you're in. Will either of you be writing on the board, or do you want to talk about how you're going to share your content in general?
I'll make it quick. I'm going to use the virtual whiteboard, or I will insert everything in a PowerPoint. It happens that the two rooms that I'm using, one has no whiteboard, and one has the whiteboard on a long wall where I would have to walk over the students to get to it. So these were not well-designed rooms. I'm just saying.
Don't say that.
But
they were not designed for this purpose.
It wasn't designed for this purpose.
Yeah.
But so I'm going to use the virtual whiteboard. I'll be interested to see how people who are really whiteboard people manage with the whiteboard cameras. I can't wait to hear, because I think eventually I'm going to be in a classroom where I'll do that.
I anticipate using it less than I normally would. I do put a lot of content in terms of terms and dates and spelling that the students would need, particularly teaching an African history course. I tend to put a lot of that content on the slides in anticipation of freeing me up, not making me step aside to spell something. I think I'll still use it. Both my classrooms have the Captiva camera, and so one of the things that is going to be a skill that I need to build pretty quickly in the first couple of weeks is remembering to switch back and forth, right? That when I turn to write on the board, that I actually have to stop and go to the camera or go to the computer and switch it over to that web browser so that whatever I'm writing is projected for all. And so I think it'll still be used in kind of brainstorming sessions and those particular kinds of pedagogical exercises, but there's going to be less of the, let me spell this out for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So one thing I would suggest, even with using the chat and the raise hand feature, which is great during class, I would encourage everyone who is sharing anything, which hopefully at some point you share something, to encourage your students from day one. If at any time you can't see what I'm doing or you can't hear me, speak up. If we're doing questions in the chat, that's one thing, but if you can't see what's going on, verbally let me know so that I can correct it immediately.
That's not the opportunity to raise your hand. That is interrupt us and say, hey, you forgot to.
Yes. Okay, so another thing that will be similar to how we were in spring and summer, because there will be online students, but now it might get a little tricky since there are in-person students as well, is that all assessments, exams, quizzes, papers, everything for everyone needs to be online.
Yeah.
Do you have advice or plans on how you're going to handle that, even though you will have students in the room with you?
One of the things that I'm going to do, it doesn't directly address your question, Faye, but I wanted to bring up was I'm trying to incorporate some flexibility into my grading scheme. And just because so many students are remote for a wide range of reasons, because of new responsibilities, because of extra stress in this moment. I would normally assign X number of essays and they would be worth A, B, C percentage of their grade. I'm going to set it up to reward their best paper, right? To kind of give them an out that if they are really stressed at a moment or are working extra hours or anything that might not allow them to focus as much as they would like, that'll be like the least weighted assignment, right? To allow them the chance to mess up in a way that I might not in a normal semester. To kind of build that into the online assignments, that kind of flexibility. But I admit, classes on Monday, and one of the things I'm still thinking about is how to re-envision the map quiz. How am I going to give a map quiz online? And pedagogically, what do I want them to learn from this experience? Transitioning to open book exams or essays instead of exams. Those are some of the kind of more easy things I've done. But I think this moment's really making us think about, why do we give exams? Why do we give them this way? And kind of structuring the kind of flexibility that allows the students to do better on the things that they're stronger at and have the weaker things not hurt them as much.
I think Jill makes a terrifically good point about where our students are going to be this semester and were last semester. Fortunately, I don't have to do like math or statistics or something like that. But what I've done is I've created a video for every week of the semester, put it in Panopto with a quiz, and assigned it a certain number of points. And I basically put the quiz where they can take it until they get it all right. They can get the maximum number of points because the point is for them to learn it. I figure if they go through it 5 times, they've learned it. And then I put the assignments through the semester added to this, with the key point being something similar to what Jill was saying, that if life goes really wrong 2/3 of the way through the semester, they can pass. Even, I'm not going to make their passing grade depend on that final paper, because we just have such a high probability that things could go badly wrong for a lot of people individually. Someone gets terribly sick or a family member gets terribly sick. So I've tried to put the quizzes to keep them engaged every single week. Also allows them to build up some points that I can see are related to this. A third aspect of that, and by the way, so I don't do in-class quizzes. We'll do polling in class, but ungraded, the Zoom polls, right? But the other thing about the Panopto quizzes is that if I start looking at the grade book at the end of the week and I see that a student actually got only 3 out of 5 on the quiz, meaning they chose not to do it again until they got it right, then that's a big red flag for me. That they couldn't even watch that 5-minute video one more time to try to get a better grade. And that's someone who I know I need to reach out to and find out what's going on.
So those are all the main topics I wanted to go through: communication, sharing things, and then assignments and assessments. We can get to some Q&A, or if you just have any general advice that you want to give for considering your online students, whether that is through the technology or through some of the things you've said about just, lessening percentages and considering the fact that we're all going through a crazy time right now.
Two things before the Q&A. My students last semester really appreciated that I had virtual office hours, and quite a lot, where I actually just turned Zoom on with a waiting room, and I sat and did my work until someone showed up and went ding, and then I talked to them. But just my making myself available to them quite often was highly valued. The second thing was that I set, because I had quite a large class, I set 4 or 5 half-hour discussion times. Now, this may be unworkable for undergrads where you've got 1 million more students than I had, but I set half-hour discussion group times where they needed to check in once a week for half an hour for a discussion. Do you have questions about class? Anything that didn't happen outside of class. That may, for a larger class, that might have to be pushed into the discussion rooms on Canvas. I had the size that I could manage it live, but the students really appreciated it. And by having, I picked times that were good for me, but kind of different times of the week, then people could find a time that they could jump in. And it really helped the students who were some time zones away. In other words, I made one really early in the morning for the people who are 8 hours ahead of us. So those two things were deeply appreciated by the students that were online in terms of staying in touch.
And another piece of advice I got about those open office hours is to set up the waiting room, so that if you are talking to someone and discussing something potentially sensitive, that someone doesn't pop, that another student doesn't pop in and overhear that. So to set up those remote office hours to allow people to pop in, but for you to control who pops in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All right, so we'll look at some of the Q&As, and attendees, if you have more questions, please submit them. So one is just a comment, and it says, FYI, Zoom gives you a report of who logs in with time in and out, and that will allow you to see if students come and go a lot, which might tell you that they have a poor internet connection. So that's another thing, we're talking about, we want an equitable experience for the online students and the in-person students. Mm-hmm. I'm actually surprised that my computer hasn't kicked me off yet. I have my phone ready to jump on in case it does, because it's being really temperamental lately. But that, that report can indicate, and if your students, you can see them coming and going, but that's definitely something to think about, their internet connection, whether they have a powerful enough device to do the things that you want them to do. You might think about sending a survey at the beginning of class, anonymous even, to just gauge how many of your students have access to certain things.
Mm-hmm.
And that's in my pre-class survey, I say not anonymously, is I want them to tell me, all the interesting things about themselves, something fun, their majors, what they want to be when they grow up, but also to indicate, what do you want me to know, right? Not that I'm prying or I need to know, but what do you want me to know about your remote learning situation, so that I can adjust expectations accordingly, and so that I can help, right? Because some of the technology things, the provost student for academic and excellence success, have been kind of working with OIT to identify, what happens if a student is in a rural area with a poor connection. What are some of the settings that they can use to better connect and turn their computer screen on? And because the university has been encouraging us to ask them to do that, right? We have to be very sensitive to the reasons that they don't want to. And so, offering advice about how to set up a green screen. My computer doesn't have the capability without that, right? And so for us to kind of, it is more work for us, but to know the resources that OIT and these other offices have already put together will help us respond in real time, instead of picking up, I need to look into that. And so part of this kind of last week before class starts, I'm trying to figure out what's out there to anticipate problems and save me time once the semester starts.
Yeah. All I can say is yes to that. And you do have to ask. We had some international students who, when we went online in the spring, didn't really want to say that they only had access to the internet on campus. So once they couldn't come to campus, they didn't want to say, well, I don't pay for internet at my apartment, and all I've got is a cell phone where I've got a $12 a month plan. Because we had the resources to help them, but we can't help them if we don't know.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to be very important. It's a challenge in rural areas, especially, but sensitively done. I think we need to ask and just say we want everybody to be with us in the same experience, and we'll do what we can to help.
Yeah. As you were answering that, a question came in that's pretty much what you just answered, but it is, I have a lot of students from less financially secure backgrounds, and they said that they don't like to have their videos on. What is a fair approach? Because the faculty member still wants to know if they're there or not. And I would say I liked one of your ideas. I don't remember who said it. I apologize, for having them upload the photo to their Zoom profile, which at least has their face. And then I would say, do a poll or have everyone type in the chat at a certain time. And that's a good way to check that they're still there without making them turn on their video. I would encourage students, if they can and if they're willing, to turn on their video, but I would not require it because they might not have a device that can, and they might be uncomfortable.
The flip side of that is all of us really, but especially in a grad school, we're teaching people to be professionals. So I tell my students up front, whatever appears on your Zoom screen needs to be a professional representation of yourself, not an avatar of Darth Vader. And the second thing is, if you choose a Zoom background because you can, then it needs to be something like an office, a classroom, whatever, that indicates the kind of status you're going to enjoy when you graduate and you work in a professional setting. So it was, it was fun with your family to have a TIE fighter from Star Wars behind you, but we're now moving into a professional environment, and you need to think about what those backgrounds are. As much as I love the tropical breeze background in Zoom, I don't use it for class.
Or something that is appropriate to the lesson of the day, right?
There you go.
Yeah, in the spring, I had students who I
remember this story.
I teach African history, but one of the students had put up the Battle of Hastings behind him, right? And so, for students who don't want to share their screen but want to demonstrate that they share their video but want to demonstrate that they are engaged and paying attention, right? They could look at the syllabus and say, oh, we are talking about the ancient kingdom of Ghana in class today. Let me see what kind of images I can find and use that as my background, right? Use that as the image rather than my personal image, right? Ways that they can demonstrate to us their engagement without having to reveal things they don't want to reveal.
Yeah, Jill, that's an awesome idea. And when you said it last time, I actually wrote it down and put it in Canvas for my world religions class. I want them every week with a different temple behind them.
Yeah.
So there's another question, and it's referring back to when we were talking about whiteboards, and I said, encourage your students to speak up if they can't see. And the question is, if they say, I can't see, then what? And that is your cue to move the camera or make sure you are sharing the screen and just double check your technology.
Yeah, and my handwriting is terrible. And so I have to be conscious, that if they say, I can't see that, right? The part of it is also on me to more carefully, enunciate every letter that I might normally, because there are these extra layers for them to see what we're writing on the board.
I type on the virtual whiteboard because, I can barely write with a pen. I certainly can't write with a brick called a mouse. So, I just go over, I can type with the keyboard and get it pretty fast.
Yeah, and
All right.
both of my classrooms have in-wall cameras, but say I was in a training with Faye earlier this week or last week, I can't remember, because pandemic, what day of the week is it? But you can move some of the cameras. Actually, I'd say one of mine has the kind of stand where I can move it to follow around or flip it around to see the students. And so, if they can't see, some of the classrooms have greater capabilities than others to move the camera and to help them see.
Yeah.
If I can jump in, I walked around all of our classrooms, and certainly everybody should check their classroom first. OIT has been putting stuff in classrooms as fast as they can, and that means they didn't always straighten out the cables and the camera when they left. So if you're one of the people who's always just walked into the classroom and the camera was set up and everything, don't expect that on Monday. Go in a little early and make sure it's all working.
Yeah, I was say, at the risk of overloading Faye and all of her colleagues, it was really helpful to get into my particular classroom because basically I could set it up so that it saved all of my passwords and automatically, when I click Zoom, it recognizes me and brings it up instead of me having to enter that. And because we are going to have to be policing mask wearing and the cleaning of desks and all of these things,
A lot of other things.
Yeah, having it already set up made it kind of lifted a weight off of my shoulders to know that I can walk into the class on Monday and hopefully everything will be ready to go because I was already in there and set things up.
Yes. So my final words before I let our panelists give their final words are yes, absolutely. Go to your classroom. You don't have to have an ATSD with you. You can reach out to one if you would like, but we are, you can go on your own, go visit your classroom, try things out, save your settings, do all of that. And if you have any issues at all, send those to your ATSD because we do have people performing quality checks this week. But if there's something that you see that we don't see, we need to know. So report those to us. So now we have about 2 minutes left. So if you just want to wrap up what you think that people should do to consider their online students in one little sentence, we'll end with that.
I think I'll end by recognizing this semester is going to be a lot more work and that we need to be more attuned to who is not showing up, right? And so, I think the moment is asking a lot of us, but it is really important to kind of keep those informal and formal attendance and reach out when a student hasn't spoken in a while or they haven't turned in an assignment, right? The things that you might let slide in normal times to see what happens next time, we have to intervene earlier. And on that note is to really pay attention. In normal times, the university sends out the midterm progress reporting for our students who have scholarships or participate in athletics or are on probation for one reason or another. I think it's extra important that we keep an eye on those lists and report accordingly so that we have lots of support in making sure that none of the students fall through the cracks.
Yeah. I'd say the main thing is constant contact. And as tempted as I am to get absorbed in the technological possibilities, email works. I have students for whom the phone works. And that's really, that's not my preferred means of communication, but for some students, that's really the way to go. They don't have a computer that they can get to all the time for email. It's better to call the cell phone. And I'd say just staying constantly in touch. And as much as I love the technology, don't let it overwhelm you. We're teachers that taught without all this stuff before and communicated without it, and we can still do it.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you to our panelists and our attendees. And this recording will be up shortly. And be sure to check out the other offerings for our Keep Teaching webinars.
Thanks, Faye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Wave hand.